As a kid of about 13 or so, I spent my summers living with my grandma on her old homestead in south central Kansas. Mom and I didn't get on very well, but Grandma had made it very clear that I was always welcome on her doorstep. I spent most of those summers impersonating Huck Finn, fishing for catfish on Walnut Creek just north of Granny's home in Tacoma. But by July, a young fella could make a buck or two working for the local farmers. Milo, or maize, is a plant that was locally used for feed, as I recall. Before it could be harvested, though, the fields had to be prepared through a process called roguing. In those days before progressive genetic engineering, some Milo stalks would grow too tall for the combine to harvest correctly. Those large stalks wouldn't fit within the combine's circular reel, thereby impeding the harvest of the surrounding Milo plants too. Consequently, farmers needed cheap labor to walk the fields, cutting down those large rogue Milo plants, preparing the fields for their final harvest. It was good money for a penniless, barefoot teenager, so my cousins and I eagerly jumped at the opportunity to gain a few bucks, money we would so often lose to the carnies manning the rip-off games at the annual county fair that conveniently rolled into town every August. However, that first year that I joined my cousin's roguing crew, I knew exactly how I would use that precious earned money, the money I'd carefully deposited in the Tacoma State Bank. I wanted to buy a stereo. I wanted to buy a really good one. It took an appropriate amount of effort that summer to save money. The work was hot, and I really wanted to splurge when the carnival finally arrived in La Crosse. But I stuck to my plan and immediately rushed off to Sears Roebuck to see how far my summer's earnings would take me when I finally got back to Denver. I brought home the fanciest stereo I could afford that autumn. Barely had enough to purchase a record or two after it was all said and done. So imagine my dismay when Mom took one disapproving look at those beautiful new boxes and sternly proclaimed, "You're taking every bit of that back, young man." It was her wish that I use that money for school clothes. I experienced a painful lesson that dreary autumn, but it wasn't going to be the last time I'd have to endure that type of unjust gut punch in my life. Our family court system here in America works very much like the roguing story I just shared. In adulthood, I eventually pursued my lifelong dreams of becoming both a teacher and a father, children and childhood development being an innate passion of mine. The eventual divorce was certainly unfortunate, but inevitable given our incompatibility. Fighting like cats and dogs got awfully old, especially in front of kiddos. What I didn't foresee in obtaining a divorce was the loss of 50-50 custody of my children, something my physician ex-wife fought tooth and nail to secure. Given time, money, persistence, and a biased court, her efforts prevailed. As time drug on, I became deeply depressed during this process. I could tell I was going to lose. In the end, I simply could not afford, on my meager teacher's salary, to compete with her affluent resolve to win those battles. It took years, going broke in the process, and I did give it everything I had, but I eventually lost the war. With the stroke of a pen, a court-appointed family investigator granted my ex full custody. My master's degree in education, my profession as a teacher, the fact that I had been my oldest daughter's primary caregiver when she was an infant meant nothing to the court. As a consequence, I was not only going to lose my overnights, vacations, and holidays, I was going to gain the privilege of paying my ex child support for the pleasure of losing the natural parental influence 50-50 custody provides. It was an absolute miscarriage of justice. Here's my point. When a court system can rob a parent like me of his purpose and meaning in life, his impetus for getting out of bed and putting one foot in front of another. What greater good is that judicial system possibly accomplishing? My children have certainly not benefited from this situation. My loss of vocation and decline into poverty has done society little good. And this story is not simply anecdotal. 50-50 custody is not presumptive in our nation. Mothers' rights constantly outweigh those of the fathers. I'm not the only man who has been gut-punched by our family court system in this way. Indeed, if it could happen to me, it could happen to any father. And it does. A person needs to benefit from the hard work they accomplish in life. One's efforts need to matter. An individual's basic right to be a parent ought to be protected under the law, should fall somewhere within the realm of one's pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. A competent father who simply wants to retain 50-50 custody is not a rogue stock of Milo, an inconvenience for the judicial system's combine to process. He's a parent, every bit as capable of providing the nurturing and care children require. Thanks for watching this video. I hope some of you will think about these issues the next time you hear someone referred to as a deadbeat dad. The stories are so often more complicated than you'd think.